Hi everybody, and welcome back to Atlas Debate Resources. In this video, we're starting a new series where we cover all the basic components of the UIL LD Manual. This is something I put together as a debater that I helped use to teach other debaters in UIL LD. It's all the basic components of the debate as a whole, things like case construction, different types of resolutions, so on and so forth. If you're interested, click on the link in the description and you can buy it and have it for yourself. Because of how long it is and how much information's in it, we're going to be breaking down this video into multiple sections. Today, we're covering points 1 through 7, just the basic components of a case that universal amongst all of them. So let's get started. So, to start off, the basic components are outlined like thus. We have the value, the criterion, the observation, the contention, and analysis. A little side note here is that the resolution is the brain of your case, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we get into the analogy that I use to help understand the parts of a case. So, first up is the value, and I ask you to imagine that the case is like a human body. So each part of the case is a part of the body that's necessary to make the body continue moving. The resolution, as stated before, is the brain. And what that means is that the resolution thinks and orders everything else to go. The rest of the body wouldn't be able to do anything if the brain wasn't ultimately achieving or asking it to do things. The value, on the other hand of things, is the heart of your case. The brain can't think, can't work if you don't have a heart pumping blood and moving everything along. So that's why the value is the heart. It's the very central part of your case. It's the number one thing that needs to be upheld on your side of it. You can't achieve your burden. You can't negate or affirm the resolution if you drop your value because, like I say, a couple points down, the value is why you affirm or negate, and because of that, it tends to be an abstract concept, something like justice or generosity, things like that. I know you're kind of thinking, "Oh, this is a lot of terms. What exactly do you mean? This is why we affirm negate. It has to be an abstract concept." Uh, to explain it, let's look at a resolution a few years back, and that was the benefits of genetically modified organisms outweigh the risks. So, on the affirmative side, you're saying that statement is true. And the reason you're saying it's true is because of your value. So maybe it's something like security. I say that the benefits outweigh the risks of genetically modified organisms because security is achieved through them, or whatever the case may be. So that's the very simple what the concept of a value is. And the value is written, argued, and debated in these 5 ways. The first, most simple, and most common is that your value is achieved by the act of affirming or negating. So going back to the genetically modified organism example, my value of security, I'm saying that security is achieved because of the benefits of genetically modified organisms. When we put the benefits over the risks, we get security. Whereas in the negative, you could have a value of something such as transparency, where you're saying transparency gets taken away by the affirmative position because genetically modified organism companies aren't transparent. So you're saying that the key to your value being allowed is by either affirming or negating the resolution. The next is that it's necessary to affirm or negate. And that kind of seems very similar to the first, but it's a little bit different in the sense of that your value means that you have to affirm or negate. It's a little bit more of a theoretical, philosophical, typically moral concept. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be debating because I have this value, because I value justice or something along the lines, I have to, it's necessary for me to affirm or negate. And that's what these 2 points kind of here to explain it is that when you hold this value, I must affirm or I must negate because of it. So pretty simple. If you're going to run this type of value, you need to be very passionate, very well spoken. It's not very recommended for beginners because it's very emotionally charged. However, the further you go with it, it can be very strong. The next is that the value is the thing being debated. And I apologize for going very quickly. There's a lot of information. I want to make sure it gets covered. Like always, if you have any questions specifically, reach out to me on my Instagram or my email, all of which is linked on my YouTube channel, and I'll be willing to help. So again, going back, the thing being debated is the next part of a value. A very common resolution is going to have some kind of term, and as end with is just. For example, a topic I had as a debater was gentrification is just. And in this case, a good value would be justice. And what you're going to say is that justice is achieved or negated by a criterion. It's a super strong value style because it is literally the matter at hand, directly tied to the resolution, and it's very hard to say that you aren't linked to the resolution. However, on the flip side of things, that value tends to be way, way, way more abstract and open than normal. For example, justice is a huge concept that splinters out into thousands of different forms, which means it can be very hard to debate and can pin you in a place you don't want to be. Because again, even when we try and define justice in philosophy, we typically define it in ways that are still very broad. And then finally, the last common style of value is analyzing the topic. And what this means is that instead of just flat out affirming or negating, you're using your value to look at the topic, and then you choose that you affirm or negate, and ultimately you affirm or negate. What that means is that, say we go back to that gentrification is just example, then you could have a value that is a specific form of justice or a specific mindset on justice. Like, for example, the categorical imperative. And then because you value the categorical imperative, you have to break down the topic and decide whether or not it's just. And then your whole case is built off of that, is that proving it is just because of your value as the lens. So yeah, very simple, three distinct different concepts, very common. For beginner, I recommend the simplest one is to start off with just by saying your value is achieved or negated by the resolution. However, as you get better and better and get more experience, the topic analysis one is very good and typically does very well later on in competition. That's what I end up running a lot. But pick your speed. Ultimately, what's so great about Lincoln Douglas debate is because it's a value debate, you get to pick something that you actually value, you actually care for. My ultimate recommendation that I told everyone from debaters in my school to other schools is that when you're picking out a value, pick one that actually is valued by you. You'll be able to debate it better, understand it better, and it'll mean more to you. So moving right on is the criterion. The criterion would be the blood vessels of your case. So your heart is pumping out the blood, but the criterion is sending that blood everywhere it needs to go. Criterion, as you note in the bold, achieves and or measures your value. It doesn't have to do both. It can do one or the other. What that means is like I said, values are very abstract concepts. Criterion is what kind of shows us what specific part of the value we're talking about. So if we're talking about the grand scheme of justice, your criterion can limit down justice to specifically distributive justice or criminal justice or retributive justice, things like that. In addition, it can also show how you achieve your value. So, for example, say you have a value of security, then your criterion could be something like establishing a military presence, something like that, something that actually literally leads to the achievement of your value. And then you can show that the resolution meets this achievement process or that your body of your case does. Real quick note, a lot of people misunderstand this and do this incorrectly. Your criterion should and really must be phrased with a verb. The reason why is because measuring and achieving are actions, whereas a value is just an abstract idea. You can't achieve or measure something just by throwing out an idea. A common example for this would be if you look at something like security. Actually promoting security measures, promoting food security, promoting military presence, those are all actions that achieve or measure security. Whereas if I just write down security in a piece of paper, that doesn't actually achieve anything. That's the difference between the concept and the actual verb and achievement. And a criterion, you should only have one of them. Some cases and some circuits outside of UIL have multiple. I would not recommend it. Almost no UIL judge will accept it because it's too complicated and ruins the purpose of what we're trying to do here. And like I said, criterions, in addition to achieving and measuring and potentially both, another form of criterion is analysis. So, especially when you get into two-party resolutions where it's asking you to look at pros and cons or two different concepts, criterion can serve as your form of analysis. So I'm analyzing what the resolution means through the lens of my criterion. Similar to value, except it gives you more opening. Personally, I recommend if you're going to go the analysis route in your case, then your value should be the abstract idea, and your criterion should be what's analyzing, because it links your case to your resolution, so on and so forth. Next up is the observation. These next three parts we're going to talk about, observation, contention, and analysis, are what make up the body of your case, so the vast majority, the meat. The observation would be like the environment around your body, not necessarily the body itself, just kind of what's going on around. What makes observations unique is that it's outside information that sets the framework for the round. Usually, observations have nothing to do with what the round or the resolution's about. To give you an example, several years back, under the genetically modified organism topic that I talked about, I had a observation that talked about why monopolies are bad. And at first, you're like, well, what does monopolies have anything to do with genetically modified organisms? Well, then I showed in my case how ultimately GM corporations cause monopolies. And even though it's outside information, it was crucial for the framework of the round. Because of that, observations are an amazing tool that can set up what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. In addition, observations kind of set up the rules for the round. Something that makes UIL LD very special and very interesting is that as you debate, you create the voting issues. You decide what makes the round win or lost. You decide what achieves or fails your burden as long as you prove it to the judge. And an observation is a fantastic way of creating those rules right in your case. So because of that, that's one of the many styles of observations, very common. They make them very powerful. In addition, observations can also be used to build up your value criterion or links. It could just simply be outside information, like why justice is such a good value, or why we all deeply care about generosity, or why the duty of government is crucial for society to survive. This is all outside information, but it builds up your value criterion, kind of provides extra evidence. And this is kind of some housekeeping notes. Just like any card, you want to underline the points that you read. If you ever buy one of my cases, you'll see what I mean. Again, if you're interested in that, look at the description below for my shop, and it'll show you all different cases I have available. Moving on, the styles of observations, there are many different kinds. I'm not going to cover them all in super deep detail, but I'm going to cover them kind of briefly each one. The first simple one is that it outlines. Your observation kind of creates this overall point by point what you're going to be discussing. So, for example, you could have an observation that says justice makes people happy as a first observation. Observation 2, if people aren't happy, they don't work, society falls apart. It's setting up this outline. And then your contentions prove how you achieve justice, which therefore achieves happiness, which therefore achieves so on and so forth. Next is justify. So what your observation can do is that it can prove maybe something that's not exactly a common knowledge. So, for example, if you ever want to run a squirrel case, like Stoicism, a case I wrote several years ago was about how what you actually have to do is cause more issues, more burdens, because as the Stoics show, that makes you a better person, makes society better. But that's not very common knowledge, is not commonly agreed upon in the world of philosophy. So you would need an observation to justify that. That's where an observation comes in. Next is qualify. What this simply means is that your observation kind of creates that ethos, why something is so important. So it, like I said earlier, it builds up your value. So maybe it says justice is so important because of this. Next is analysis. Your observation can analyze the resolution for you, set up a framework, if you will. For example, when you have cases that talk about just the phrase is just or necessary, your observation can analyze what makes something just, what makes something necessary, and then that's the framework that you and your opponent have to meet throughout. Building off analysis, observations can simply define something. Maybe it's a concept that's not as common, like, for example, the human law theorem or things like that. They're not very common, so an observation is a good place to define those, as well as it's kind of a time suck. It makes your opponent have to listen and flow things, and they might miss stuff later on. And then finally, build up, kind of building off of analysis and define and qualify. An observation can just be extra evidence that builds up your points or your claims. So, lots of power with observations. I always like to include them. They were my biggest strength as a debater. Make sure you include them in there because it just well round your case, especially as the affirmative. Negative, it's really good to create that framework that the affirmative has to meet in the clash. Like I said, remember, You decide the voting issues as you go along. And if you create the voting issues from the get-go in your case, it just makes one less thing you have to worry about as you go along. So lots of power. Keep that in mind as you go through your UIL LD career. Next is contentions. Contentions are the muscles of your case, the meat. They actually physically get things done for you, and ultimately they're the evidence to support your claim. So as you've noted, so far it's been a lot of abstract concepts, justice, this measuring and achieving criterion that's theoretical, these observation outside information. Contention is the actual evidence that proves that these things can be done and should be done. So for example, going back to the genetically modified organism case and resolution, if I have a case all about GMs causing monopolies, then I require a contention that actually shows they do this, real evidence. Something important to note, people will tell you that LD is not evidence-based debate and CX is. That's not exactly true. The difference is that CX debate is required to be statistical evidence 9 times out of 10. LD, you'll have a little more wiggle room. You can have more theoretical or hypothetical evidence. You don't have to have statistics every time, but it's preferred. Just keep in mind, depending on what point you prove, depends on what kind of evidence you need. If it's a claim that requires evidence, like genetically modified organism kills bees, you need evidence. If it's a claim that says something like the morality of something, then you can't really statistically define that. So just use your head on these matters and make sure you do something that makes sense. If it wouldn't convince you, it's probably not going to convince a judge. And again, like an observation, underline the parts of the case you read out loud. There are 3 styles of contentions, short and sweet. First is just simply evidence. It's just numbers, statistics to prove your point. Next is commentary. It's maybe an article or an interview, someone explaining what the concept is, kind of like an observation, except it's on topic. And then finally, links. So contentions can link each part together. So maybe it shows that the evidence between justice and genetically modified organisms, that there is some kind of link there, things like that. All right. Second to last, we're going to talk about the analysis. This is the last part of your case. I put this as the meat of your case because this is what kind of fills in all the gaps. We get bored. Everyone gets bored if you just hear someone reading someone else's words the whole time. The analysis is your time to talk and to show your points on things. This is usually your introduction, your conclusion, maybe commentary in between case. The thing judges love is when you speak to them as if they don't know what you're talking about, because sometimes they don't, and sometimes you get really far ahead of yourself and use vernacular and terms that make things confusing. When you actually take the time to take those big words, those big contentions, and break them down into layman's terms, it makes you more relatable and makes you more enjoyable of a speaker to listen to. That's why analysis is so crucial. Like I said, there's the introduction, there's conclusions, there's also commentary, maybe little bits in between each contention that explains what they mean. There's topic analysis. This could be something you start off with. Here's how I understand the topic, giving some examples. There's also qualifying. Maybe you explain the person who wrote this card, they're an expert because of this. And then finally, there's kind of a poisoning the well analysis. And this is where you take the time to say, and judge, the opponent is probably going to make this claim. And I know this claim cannot work because of what my case has said. If this claim is brought up, it doesn't apply. So it's already kind of going out and attacking your opponent before they ever bring anything up. That last one is, again, that's more of an advanced technique. Only do that if it's something you've seen a lot. So maybe you heard the same argument over and over again. Just try to avoid that, because if they don't bring up that argument, you basically wasted time. So analysis, kind of a brief overview of all the points. Resolution is your brain. It's what you're thinking, what you're doing, what you're trying to prove, right or wrong. The value is your heart. It's giving you the motivation to keep going, pumping out the blood. It is why you either affirm or negate. Your criterion, your blood vessels, they kind of send that blood everywhere. They link certain things together. Your criterion puts the value into an understandable way. It either measures or achieves it and tells you how the resolution is met by it. There's your observation, which is outside information that kind of creates the environment for your case to be in. This is the framework, what we have to do to win, lose. This is what this term means. Next is contentions, your muscles of your case that get things done. Your evidence, your statistics that actually prove the claims of your case. And then the analysis, your own 2 bits, your words, your commentary on things to connect between you and the judge, as well as maybe explain things to make your opponent look a little silly. Last thing I want to cover is to get out of the way is UILD citation style. Very similar to MLA style, but not as stringent, not as specific. What you're going to do is you're going to put the last name, comma, first name, underline the last name or bold it, whatever makes you know that this is what you read. Because when you go through your case, you're going to read the last name and the year. So last name, comma, first. In quotations or italics, if it's a book, you're going to put the title. You're going to put the source, so where it got published from, usually in italics, if it's a publisher or website or whatever the case may be. You're going to put the date, underline the year because you're going to read the year. And if there's a link, you're going to put a link at the very end. Like I said, when in doubt, use MLA. If you can't remember the exact style, let's look up the MLA style. It doesn't really matter which style you use, just as long as it's cited correctly. People don't do it as often anymore. It's not as common, but they can absolutely ask to see your case. And if your evidence isn't correctly cited, it can be technically thrown out under UILD rules. So don't just put the name and the year. Get everything done correctly. Just a nice little practice for later on. So yeah, that's the first video. We discussed the basic components of a case. Moving forward, we're going to be talking a little bit more about some philosophy concepts. We're going to talk about different styles of cases that I've seen, your most common styles, as well as the burdens, how you actually win or lose. I hope this video was helpful. Again, if you want to have this manual for your own, maybe to hold on to, maybe to teach your own debaters, there will be a link in the description below. I hope this helped to take a burden off of your shoulders and come back whenever you need some more. Thank you for your time.